Baruch atah Hashem misameach chasan b'kalo. Right? Okay. Sois Tasis Vesagel Haakarah. Sois Tasis, it's a double term, meaning that she will rejoice. When it says it twice, Sois Tasis, rejoice, she shall rejoice. Vesagel, that's another term for happiness and rejoice. Who is it talking about? Haakarah, the barren woman, the woman that cannot have children. So she will, in the time to come, she will certainly rejoice when she gathers her children besimcha, again with joy. So this is a bracha that we say under the chuppah, and then we repeat it anytime you have a minyan that gets together to rejoice with the chasen and kala for the next 7 days. And it's also the beginning of a mimer that the Alter Rebbe here in Likutei Torah, beginning on the pasuk says Tasis. Yeah, okay. So this mimer is special to me because this was when I was a young child. So the first year of learning Chassidus, we learned Tanya. And the very second year, we learned selected Maimorim from the Likutei Torah of the Alter Rebbe. And this was one of those Maimorim. So it's very dear to me. I remember it very well. I remember learning it with the famous Mashpia, Rabbi Khan, amongst a few other Maimorim in the Likutei Torah that we learned. And it is in the Parshas Tazria. What's the connection to Parshas Tazria? So the Alter Rebbe brings a medrash to explain this pasuk, says Tasis Vesagel Haakarah. It's a medrash that's actually on the very beginning of Parshas Tazria. Now, before I get to that medrash, let me mention a few of the what's called the diyukim, the questions that the Alter Rebbe asks on this pasuk, so it's Tasis Vesagel Haakarah, or this bracha. If you look at the first two words, that's actually it's a repetition of the same word, sus, which means to rejoice. Sois Tasis, which in the simple pshat would mean, by saying it twice, is it will certainly happen. She will certainly rejoice in the future, this child barren woman, when she gathers her children to her. So first, the question the Alter Rebbe asks, 1 second. What does it mean, b'kibbutz b'neho? She's an Haakarah. She has no children. So what does it mean that she will gather her children? Now, again, this is one of those kind of questions where the Alter Rebbe is kind of directing you to some interesting interpretation. It doesn't necessarily, make the pasuk difficult to understand, because when you hear that bracha, what you're assuming is that the bracha is that the woman who was an Haakarah, she was, childless, she will in the future have children and gather the children together. But yet, the Alter Rebbe, in the interpretation according to Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe will point out why she's referred to as an Haakarah, and at the same time, it's possible to have children. So you could be a woman that is childless, but yet she has children. So that will be the interpretation of Chassidus. Another thing that's interesting about this pasuk is that the word tasis, which is when this bracha, I don't think it's a pasuk, it's just a bracha, it's a nusach of the bracha from the Sheva brachas. So when it says tasis, the word tasis could actually be translated in English 2 ways. Now, the way Hebrew works, the way Lashon HaKodesh works, is basically that every word begins with what's called the shoresh, the base word, and it's usually 3 letters. Some that say that it's actually could even be just 2 letters, or it's 2 letters and there's a silent letter that you don't see. But in any case, so here the base would be sus or sus sin, sin nun. And the way it works in Lashon HaKodesh, in Hebrew, is that you could take any word, whether it's a noun or whether it's a verb, by adding a letter before or a letter after, you change the word. Now, I forget all the words in grammar or phonics, as we used to call it many years ago. But whatever that word is, the phonics, the way it works is that the letters will actually change whether you're talking about something that will happen, something that did happen. Is it the feminine? Is it masculine? And so on and so forth. So it happens to be that one letter and then added to a word, and then the word is actually pronounced the exact same way both ways, is tough before a word. And here we have the word sus with a tough, with this tasis. So tasis could either mean future, she will, or tasis, she did. Okay? So that will come up later in the interpretation of the Alter Rebbe. To explain this, pasuk, the Alter Rebbe quotes a medrash that I just mentioned from Parshas Tazria on the very beginning. So the beginning of Parshas Tazria, we read, Isha ki Tazria. A woman, if she should have a child, she shall bear seed, have a child. V'yolda zachar, and she gives birth to a boy, to a male, and then the halacha is as follows. Then the pasuk goes on to tell us what the halacha would be. It changes if she gives birth to a female, to a girl. Okay, so that's just the simple halacha. You know, the pasuk is telling us it only applies to Tuma, her state of purity, and the laws, that follow childbirth with regard to her state of purity or impurity. Okay. The Medrash looks at this pasuk, and the Medrash makes a biological statement, a very interesting biological statement. We know, of course, in order for a woman to bear a child, it takes a husband and a wife, a man and a woman. When they come together, and they then produce a child. Now, each contributes to the child that's born. A man cannot give birth without a woman cannot give birth without a man. Notwithstanding whatever is going on in the crazy world today, but we will not go there. But that seems to be the basic common sense. So I'm going to stick with it. So a man and a woman, it takes a man and a woman, and each contribute. Okay. So the very interesting biological observation, the Medrash says, based on this pasuk, Isha ki Tazria, the pasuk begins first by mentioning the woman who she provides the seed, v'yolda zocher, and then she gives birth to a male. Says the Medrash that it depends who provides the seed first. If the woman provides the seed first, then followed by the man, then the child will be a male. If it's in reverse, if the male provides the seed first and then the woman, then it will result in the birth of a female. A simple biological statement. Now, so for those who are skeptical amongst us, we all have some degree of skepticism. So I want to tell you that years ago, there was actually an article, it was in a Hebrew newspaper, that actually quoted this medrash and gave the scientific basis. Okay. So there's some scientific truth to it. I mean, everything, we know, of course, everything in Torah is true. Doesn't always coincide with the current state of science. And in this particular article, the author was making the point that although this medrash has been recorded for many, many years, hundreds and hundreds of years, but it can actually be substantiated scientifically, biologically as well. Okay. Now the Alter Rebbe quotes also from science. The Alter Rebbe says the reason why it works this way, where depending on who provides the seed first, that will determine what the child will be. Says the Alter Rebbe that according to the philosophim, it's a technical thing. Now, when he says philosophim, by the way, philosophim is scientists. That's the way scientists used to be. Well, philosophy was the beginning of science. Today, they separate into two separate fields. There's science, there's philosophy. They don't always agree with each other, but originally, the original scientists were the philosophers. Aristotle was a philosopher, but he was, also a scientist. So the Alter Rebbe actually also refers to it as the philosophy. So the philosophers say it's a very technical thing that since the whatever, okay, so whoever goes in first comes out last, right? So if you go into a space that could only hold one person at a time, right? And so whatever goes in first, and then it's followed by the second. When it comes to extracting, the second comes out first, and the first comes out second. Okay, so that's just a simple, says just a physical phenomenon. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe quotes from the scientists that the reason why, if the woman's seed is first, followed by the man, so then what it produces, what comes out is will be a male, because that's what came in second, what came from the man. Okay. The Alter Rebbe rejects this. It also doesn't make pure scientific sense either, because as we said, it takes both the man and the woman to produce a child. Interestingly, there's a mimer before this mimer, also quotes this medrash, and makes a very interesting point about why it's necessary for both a man and a woman to produce a child. Because and it's just an interesting point. If I was a rabbi, I could make a nice speech out of this for a wedding or a sheva brachas or something. But the point is that a man represents chesed, a woman represents gevura, and chesed alone and gevura alone doesn't work. Okay, so for example, chesed that's it's not controlled. So let's say it's unconditional chesed can be very destructive, right? Like we all used the example of providing the alcoholic with the alcohol because you feel bad, so you think you're doing kind, but you're not doing a kindness, right? So chesed could be actually very destructive. Likewise, gevura. Gevura means that there has to be some kind of restraint. There has to also be some discipline, right? But if the gevura is pure gevura, that could also have a negative consequence. So each has to be tempered with the other. So when a chassid and kale come together, so you may represent one perspective, she represents the other perspective, but in order for this to actually produce something positive, even when it comes to a child, biologically, says the Alter Rebbe, you need the chesed has to find the gevura in the chesed, and the gevura has to find the chesed in the gevura, and only then can the chesed and the gevura come together, because otherwise it'll be a total clash, and it just wouldn't work. And that's the interesting lesson that could be learned from the biological phenomenon of birth, where you have to have both from two different perspectives, which on its own perhaps are extremes, but in order for something productive to result, there needs to be the tempering of each so that they meet in a place where they can coexist. Okay, so whatever, there's a big lesson there, of course, and you can make many sermons based on that. But back to what we were saying before about the biology of how a child is produced, right? So here in this Maimer, the Alter Rebbe says that what the scientists say is probably not true, because in this Lashon, in the Nusach of what we're saying here, or I'm sorry, and from the Medrash, it's not. So if you follow the old science, the Alter Rebbe quotes, you then the male that's being born is actually because of the husband, right? Because that's what went in last, so that comes out first. Okay. The Alter Rebbe says from the Medrash, though, no, it's the woman that's giving birth to the Zachar. She's saying that her contribution, not because she went in first, so therefore she has to the cave or the female has to come out last. No, because she went in first, therefore she will produce a Zachar, a male. Okay. All of this is biology, says the Alter Rebbe, but this has, of course, a great message in our service to Hashem. Okay, so this is the real point of this whole mimer. We know, says the Alter Rebbe, that basically just the notion of serving Hashem, what does that mean? So there is, of course, serving Hashem, like, in a very rote, just, like a robot with absolute pure Kabbalah's oil, where, okay, that's what I have to do, that's what I will do. I don't think about it much, and I will just simply do it. Tell me exactly what to do, look in the Shulchan Aruch, follow the orders, and do exactly what it says, and that's it. There's some value to that, I will say. But ultimately, it's Avodas Hashem, serving Hashem, is about developing a relationship with Hashem. There has to be emotional involvement. You're learning Tanya these days. The Alter Rebbe makes that point. He quotes the Zohar, where he says that if you do a mitzvah, you can't take it away. You did the mitzvah, but like Parshas Tazria doesn't really go anywhere, whatever that means. But it doesn't have much spiritual value, which is also important. So it says it's like a bird that doesn't have wings, so it can't fly. So you still have the bird. The bird is there, but there's no wings, it doesn't fly. So the mitzvah, a mitzvah that's done purely mechanically, right, without any actual emotional involvement, and the emotional involvement would be the two elements of ahava and yira, developing a desire to be close to Hashem, which is ahava, that's the love. Also the yira, which is to be in complete and absolute awe of Hashem, where you're in a state of literally trembling even. So these are two required elements in our relationship with Hashem. Ahava v'yira. Ahava v'yira itself is also nothing, because what are wings if it doesn't have a body to lift, right? But the body without the wings, you might have the body, but it doesn't fly. So in Avodas Hashem, the emotional attachment that needs to be developed is necessary. Now, how do you develop? Okay. So interestingly, in the Zohar, there are two terms which are basically describing how a person gets awakened. That's the actual word, is arusa, an awakening. But the Zohar describes that there are two different kinds of awakening. There's one awakening that comes from above. Okay? That's called the Isaruso de Le'ela. An awakening that comes from above. What does it mean it comes from above? That it's an experience that a person has in his life, but it wasn't contingent on any contribution that he made. We go through life and things happen, things that are perhaps unexpected. And just the fact that we experience them, it has an effect on us. Okay? This could be one of the God forbid, it could be a tragedy. Very often a person, experiences a tragedy, and that awakens all kinds of emotions. Often we see that it's actually positive emotions. There are people, who somehow drifted totally away from the Yiddishkeit, and then a parent, let's say, that they were very close with passes away, or maybe even a grandparent, right? And all of a sudden, the experience of that loss awakens a kind of a yearning, right? And this is something that we observe. It's something, it's a common thing that the people will then, start coming to shul, or they start, doing things. They remember how Zaidi and Bubby Seder, we haven't had a Seder. Maybe now it's time to make a Seder, things like that. So you're awakened by a circumstance that happens outside of your direct control. Okay? This is called an Isarusa de Le'ela. It's coming from Hashem. Everything comes from Hashem, Shochet pratis. And you had that experience, and you can now, actually latch onto that experience and develop it into something positive. Okay? Being that it comes from Hashem, by the way, it's also very powerful. It can be very, very powerful. So sometimes we just, witness, let's use a better example than a tragedy, but say a person witnesses a miracle that happens to him in his life, right? Something that seemed to be like so unexpected and so supernatural, right? And again, that he has a deep awakening. I mean, just listening to the stories of after October 7th, we have, countless different, incidents where the person, well, there was a tragedy there, but there was also many miracles that happened, and we see people literally being awakened in their Yiddishkeit. The other kind of Isaruso that's mentioned in the Zohar is the Isaruso de Lisato. It comes from below. What does it mean it comes from below? Sometimes a person just like makes up his mind. He says, you know what? I got to do better. And you know what? I am going to start reading and I'm going to start learning. And the more I learn, I think I'm going to actually develop a perspective. I'm going to develop an attitude, right? Because that's what happens. Now, it doesn't happen quickly. And it's usually not like really powerful and potent. But if you apply yourself and you discipline yourself and you push on, you push forward, and then you might have, sometimes, like you fall back and then you get up and you keep on going, right? You missed a few shiur, right? And then you made up your mind, okay, that's it. I'm not missing any more shiur. And then you listen, and then you apply it, and it changes. You get an attitude, right? And that could be something that brings you closer to Hashem. It could be something that you heard an amazing story, and now you're in awe, right? But these are all things that the person initiates on his own. He has to apply himself, and he has to develop with his own mind and his own contemplations. He has to develop this emotional attachment to Hashem. So the first one, the Susa del Liela, can be very powerful. The reason why it's powerful is because it's not of your doing, it's of Hashem's doing. So therefore it can be very powerful. But it also has a a downside. It has what's a chesaron, as you say in Hebrew. What's the chesaron? Being that you didn't initiate it, right? It has the tendency to fade very quickly. So it may have been a powerful experience, but at the same time, it's a somewhat temporary experience. Whereas the Isarusa de Lusato did not seem to be so potent and so strong, right? But because it is something that you developed on your own and you worked, to reach a certain place. So in spite of the fact that it might be lacking in some of the potency and the pizzazz, but it is far more permanent. It's more permanent. Okay. So without giving a lot of examples, I think, just hearing these two different approaches in our relationship to Hashem, one that's kind of initiated by Hashem and followed by our reaction, or one that's actually initiated by ourselves, and then we have the results, right? And the different quality of that result, one, it could be a fleeting or temporary, the other being that it's far more permanent, right? But these are things that I think, without giving a lot of different examples, I think this is something that we can all relate to and understand. Okay. Back to the Medrash. This is the Alter Rebbe. This is what we can learn from this Medrash. It says, Ish v'isha, as we know, is a metaphor for the relationship between Hashem and Knesset Yisrael. So Hashem is like the Baal, he's like the husband. The Knesset Yisrael, we are like the wife. Okay? He is the masculine, we are the feminine. He is the mashpia, we are the mekabel. He's the giver, we receive. The mimer that I heard the Chassan say yesterday is that there's no such thing as a pure giver-receiver because the receiver actually gives back to the giver, but that's a different story. But in any case, so says the Alter Rebbe, if Isha mizras tchila, if let's say the woman, she's the first to give the seed, right? What does that mean? It means that's a sarusa de wasato. We're talking about the Hisayrus, an awakening, developing emotional attachment with Hashem based on the hard work of applying yourself, right? And learning and studying and so on and so forth. And guess what? You led this zachar. The product is going to be something which we can call masculine. And forgive me for saying this, but masculine also represents strength. Okay? So what's going to be the result of a Sarusa de Lusato is it's not going to look that powerful, but it's going to be very, very grounded, and it's going to persist, and it's going to be something permanent and strong. What happens when it goes the other way around? First, it's Ish Masiriyat Chila. First, who initiated the relationship? Hashem. He brought you to a place where you totally, not to your own credit at all, you merited to an amazing and a powerful experience. Very, very strong. What, however, results? A nekeva. Something that is vulnerable. I'm not going to say weak, I guess, that because that has maybe a negative connotation. People don't like hearing that. Okay. Yeah. But just to mention the current events. So there's this whole big controversy about the trans woman or whatever, a man who decides he's a woman and then playing sports with the woman, and it's like all of the data is showing that, you know what, this is not fair. You know what I mean? You can call yourself a woman, you identify as a woman, but the data shows that you have an overwhelming advantage in sports. Okay. So that's just a fact of life. Okay. So when I say, I don't want to say that the feminine represents the weak, chas v'shalom, they're very strong in other things, but somewhat more vulnerable. Okay. So even though the initial, what started the process what brought the person closer to Hashem was very powerful, but the result is going to be more feminine. It's going to be vulnerable. It's going to be subject to fading and over time, kind of like, just disappearing. That, says the Alter Rebbe, is the message behind this medrash. Okay, so a medrash that's referencing something biological, right? And discussed in the old philosophers and the sciences, and as I mentioned from an article I read, also dealt with modern science and modern medicine, right? But the bottom line, the avodas Hashem, the message is that, you know what? If the Isha is first, meaning that we do the avodah with our own koyach, with our own energy and our own application, right? It's the Isha. It's that process. It's kind of like a feminine process, because it's not as powerful, because after all, there's only so much that we are capable as mortal beings, right? Even when it comes to Torah and mitzvahs and davening and feeling and so on and so forth, it's very limited because we are human beings. But at the same time, it's the Isha itself, it's that feminine process that actually results in a very, very permanent and strong result. Okay. So that takes care of that logistical, not that technical, what goes in first comes out last, right? Says the Alter Rebbe, no, that's not what the Medrash is saying. Well, actually, what went in first, which is the Isha, actually will now produce the Zach. Okay. Back to the Tasis Vesagel Haakarah. Says the Alter Rebbe, when you speak about this from the Avodah perspective, so when we say an Haakarah, we mean that it's childless. What does it mean, childless? He says, if they're only going to rely on the experiences that you may or may not have in your life, he said that you could end up just being childless. You'll be an Haakarah, right? Nothing will happen. You will not have actually produced anything. On the other hand, though, if you do take the initiative and you do apply yourself, then you will have children, right? Says the Alter Rebbe. So this is what the bracha and the Sheva brachas is saying. That here there's an Haakarah, right? Oh, well, let me go back a little bit. Let me just say one thing about this Rusa de Lasato. Lest you think, says the Alter Rebbe, that the Isarusa de Lasato, this is actually a very important point. If you think that the Isarusa de Lasato, right, well, and we discussed that it will produce something that's strong in the sense that it's more permanent, right? But at the same time, it's lacking something, because it's after all, it's the result of our limited efforts, and the result will be also limited. Permanent, but not as powerful. Since the Alter Rebbe, that's not necessarily true. And the reason is because the way this works is that each is arusa, each awakening, right, from one party will then stimulate an awakening from the other party, right? So in the case of a Sasarusa Deliela, we have this experience, right? And that experience awakens us, right? When we have the Sarusa Delisato, we create the experience, we create that emotional bond with Hashem, then guess what? That will also result in a response from Hashem, and there will be a sarusa coming from Hashem. You see how that works? It's not simply that you are now confined to the product that you're able to produce on your own. No, that's the beginning. And that itself has a value because it's going to be very, very personal and also very, very strong and permanent. But lest you think that it's going to be lacking some of the power, something that's amazing, something that's kind of like beyond you, right? Says the Alter Rebbe, oh no, that's going to happen too. Why? Because you're having awakened yourself, you're his Eirus. What your Hisayrus is going to do, other than what it's going to directly result in, it's also going to awaken Hashem. And when that awakens Hashem, now Hashem gets involved, and now it also has the element of that which is beyond you because it's coming from Hashem, and that has a more infinite result as well. Okay? That is a very, very important nekuda to bear in mind. Okay, we do what we can do on our own, but the result is more than the sum of our contribution. Very, very important. Okay, so it's almost like it's the rewards for your effort, because otherwise a person can get somewhat, you kind of like. You give up, you despair, this is all I'm going to have is just what me, just what I'm able to do, even though I've come a long way, right? And I'm kind of proud of what I was able to accomplish, but at the end of the day, it just seems to be very limited. But I'm talking about a relationship with Hashem, right? I want to have a little bit of the infinite in this whole thing, right? Says the Alter Rebbe, that's how it works. The Yisurusa de Lielo awakens the Yisurusa de Lisato, but the Yisurusa de Lisato also awakens the Yisurusa de Lielo. Okay? So say a person who it actually began with the Yisurusa de Lielo, right? And he got really, really, totally, completely, very, very awakened and very passionate and so on and so forth, right? If it's left alone, then it will actually fade, right? But let's say you take, you realize, how fortunate you are. And you now seem to be drawn to something that you never would have even thought about. You would not have dreamt about. Right? But it happened. And now you're drawn, right? There's a way to make sure that it does become permanent. Because as soon as you have that experience, right, and you have the emotions that you never even knew that you were capable of feeling, right, take advantage of it and now direct it into something that is very tangible. You got to awaken. Now do something. And now when you're doing it, so now it's your involvement, right? And now, by taking all of that energy, right, and funneling it into actual application, right, which doesn't happen automatically, you have to make the decision. I had this experience. I want to take advantage of it. And now I'm going to make some changes in my life. And I'm going to do things. And at a certain point, it's actually going to become more difficult because the initial excitement is wearing off. But I'm now making the commitment, right? I thank Hashem for hitting the start button, right? But he hit the start button, but it's not going to just go on perpetually forever. That's up to me. So that's my Isarusa de Lasato responding to Hashem's Isarusa de Liela. But then it keeps on going. It's a cycle. Now that you did Isarusa de Lasato, guess what? Hashem is going to continue to provide you with some kind of an emotional energy that's more than what you are accomplishing by keeping that experience and perpetuating it by applying it into decisions that you make in your life. So that's the important point here, that these two different, directions of where the excitement is coming from ends up creating a cycle where the infinite, even though it was initially involved by the kindness of Hashem, will continue if you make what's called the proper keli. You make the vessels and you direct that energy into actually implementing it into your own life. Okay, so says the Alter Rebbe, so you can have what's called an Haakarah. Haakarah means that you got very excited, but you didn't do anything about it. You didn't do anything about it, so you're childless. No, there's nothing to show for it, right? You had the great experience, you wrote it down, you shared it maybe with your grandchildren, but you didn't actually do anything with it, right? So now you're not Haakarah. So the Alter Rebbe, the bracha that we're giving here is Tasis Vesagel Haakarah. With simcha, and this is the key point that the Alter Rebbe wants to make, that when you do things besimcha, right, then guess what? It adds a certain potency to everything that you're doing. And therefore, even though it seems to be very limited based on your limited capacity and what you're able to do, if you include simcha, right, there will never be Haakarah. It will always produce something permanent and something strong. Key element in this whole dynamic of the relationship with Hashem, where sometimes it's coming from above, can't rely on that though, you never know if it will or not, or sometimes you just hit yourself on the head and say, you know what, I have to become a mensch, I got to do something different, and you start the grind of if it's done besimcha, right, you're almost guaranteed that you will not be an Haakarah. You will not be a childless person. There will always be some kind of a result. So that's the Alter Rebbe on the bracha in the Sheva brachas, based on a medrash that seems to be purely biological, but now we know that it's way more than just a biological statement. Which is based on the pasuk in today's parsha of Ishaki Tazria. We have a few more minutes. That's basically the Likutei Torah. But I want to just, Pesach is coming, and assumingly we're all, deep into the preparations for Pesach, right? So I want to mention just something about preparations for Pesach. It's just like part of Jewish culture that there's this time called Pesach, and people like literally go crazy, and they start scrubbing the house and so on and so forth. And this has been going on for a long time. Okay, you see, the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote the Zkainim. It was about the life of the Alter Rebbe's father, Rebbe Baruch. And Rebbe Baruch, he wandered around in his early youth, before he married and settled with Dvaraleya, the sister of Rabbi Yitzchok, who was actually a Rosh Yeshiva near Lubavitch. This was before Lubavitch was Lubavitch, or Lubavitch that we know. And the Frierdiker Rebbe describes in great detail the experiences that he had. And part of those experiences is that when he was in, the small villages, and he kind of gravitated towards the simple people, but they're very, very sincere and ehrlich. And some of them turned out to be that they were not so simple. They were actually great Talmidei Chachamim, right? And one of the things, and when the Friedrich Rebbe writes, he writes in great, detail and description. And you mamish, like Alter Rebbe, the others have said, the Friedrich Rebbe, I'm sorry, the Friedrich Rebbe was like just besides that Rebbe and everything else, and the Mesiras Nefesh that he had, and basically, you could say that he saved Yiddishkeit in Russia because of what the plants that he planted, at the beginning of the 1920s, at the beginning of communism. You're actually able to see 70 years later with the fall of communism how the plants that the Friedrich Rebbe planted were bearing fruits, right? The people's connection to Yiddishkeit were to a great degree, can be attributed to the Mesiras Nefesh and the things that the Friedrich Rebbe did in Russia, and what he continued to do even after he left Russia, right? Anyway, the Friedrich Rebbe writes about Rav Baruch describing the preparations for Pesach in some village, right, where the person was I think a blacksmith or whatever, right? And it's just like, wow, this is going on for a long time. He took everything, came out of the house, and everything was scrubbed down, and then everything was brought back into the house, and just the way the Friedrich Rebbe describes it. So we're going crazy, literally, for Pesach, and not to mention all the stringencies, the chumras that people have, right? I grew up, and this is the way I also continue my life, is that on Pesach we don't eat any products, any manufactured products. Everything is raw and natural and so on. My wives have been down in the kitchen already. We have a Pesach kitchen, separate Pesach kitchen, right? She's already been cooking already all week, and everything is made from raw material. It's not 100% true, because we do buy wine. I don't make my own wine. We do buy matzah, and I don't make my own matzah. Other than that, salt also, I don't make salt. So that's three things, right? And I have to admit, I have to confess that we used to not buy oil. We would use just from the chicken fat called schmaltz. But some years, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I actually was matir neder. I assembled a bezdin of 3 people, and I released myself from this chumrah. So now I allow my wife to use only very specific oil for paste. Anyway, I'm describing this because this is something well known. Now, when it comes to Pesach, people go to extremes that could actually be described as irrational to some degree, okay? But it's all right. Some people say that Pesach is the Yom Tov that was created for the people with OCD, right? And if you're not OCD, you become OCD for Pesach. Okay, so here you have like mamish extremes. So I just want to explain that these extremes that we're getting ready for now, and the couple of weeks before Pesach, this notion that it's a culture of extremes is really, it could be attributed to the Torah itself, okay? Because one of the mitzvahs of Pesach is, of course, that we're not allowed to have chametz, right? And the Torah itself treats chametz in a very unique way, in a way that it doesn't treat any other forbidden item, okay? So there are a lot of forbidden items, as we know. Of course, as Jews, we know there are things that we can't eat, and there are many and things we can't wear, shatnez and whatever. So there are forbidden items, okay? Of all the forbidden items, only 4 of them are not only forbidden. I'm talking about things that we eat, okay? That not only you cannot eat, you cannot have any benefit from them as well, okay? There's only 4. One of them is actually milk and meat. So non-kosher meat, you're not allowed to eat, but you can have benefit. If you end up with a not kosher meat, you can actually give it to your cleaning lady. But if you have, let's say, fruits of Arla, which are the first 3 years, or maybe something got mixed with milk and meat, you have to throw it out. You cannot even feed it to your animals. You can't give it to someone because you might get some benefit, maybe indirect benefit, but you can't have any. It's called hanoah. Can't have any hanoah whatsoever. Now, chametz on Pesach is also one of those things. Not only can we not eat chametz, we can't have any benefit whatsoever from chametz. But what's unique about chametz is that the Torah not only forbids us from eating or having any kind of benefit from it, we cannot even possess it. You cannot own it, okay? And if someone owns chametz on Pesach, then he is actually transgressing a serious prohibition, okay? That's one thing. There's other things, like for example, usually when it comes to something non-kosher, getting mixed with something that's kosher, so then there's what's called bottle. It could actually become nullified if it's such a small amount, less than a 1/60th, less than 2%, right? So then it's considered that it's nullified. It's not there. That works with chametz before Pesach, but it doesn't work with chametz on Pesach. So if a tiny, tiny crumb of chametz falls into your chicken soup, don't ask me how that happened, but it happened, right? On Pesach, that whole chicken soup cannot be used on Pesach. Crumb, one tiny crumb, okay? So it passes, it makes it called b'mashu, even a crumb, right? So these are the Torah laws, right? So we see that Hashem had something about chametz. He really, really didn't want chametz for the days of Pesach. It already starts even before Pesach because the Isser of chametz begins on Erev Pesach, right? So it's not just the Pesach. So, and that's why, that explains the culture that we literally go to such extremes when it comes to Pesach. Now, I'll just mention one more thing. Extremes are actually frowned upon, right? Like for a person to take upon like chumras that are like don't actually even make sense, right? That's actually in Shulchan Aruch, it's frowned upon, right? But there's an exception. When it comes to Pesach, like I said, it's the Yom Tov for the OCDs. You get away with it. Nobody's going to blame you for your extreme behavior. Anyway, so get on with your Pesach preparations, and Emetz Hashem, I'll see you next week on Friday. And we'll talk about the avoda element of chametz and why it seems to be the thing that Hashem has absolutely no tolerance for whatsoever. Okay, so good Shabbos, everyone.
Good
Good Shabbos, and thank you.
Shabbos, good Shabbos.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to end over here.